The champagne glass slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the country club ballroom. But nobody noticed the sound. They were all too busy laughing at what my sister-in-law had just said. Victoria stood there in her $15,000 wedding gown, surrounded by her bridesmaids, all of them staring at me with expressions ranging from amusement to outright contempt. Her voice had been loud enough for at least 30 people to hear. "Move aside, you ugly pig. You're blocking the photographer's shot of beautiful people." My face burned with humiliation as I stepped away from the elaborate dessert table, my hands trembling. The professional photographer looked uncomfortable, his camera hanging limply around his neck, but he said nothing. Nobody said anything. They just stared or looked away or worse, nodded in agreement. My husband Mark stood 15 feet away, frozen like a statue, his mouth slightly open but no words coming out. His mother Patricia, my mother-in-law, stood beside him wearing a silk champagne-colored gown and a small, satisfied smile. She didn't say anything to defend me. She never did. But what Victoria didn't know as she posed for her perfect wedding photos that day, what none of them knew, was that in exactly 3 months, I would step out of a luxury limousine as the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company. In 3 months, Patricia would discover that the mysterious buyer interested in acquiring her failing company was me. The plain, unremarkable daughter-in-law she had spent 5 years dismissing and diminishing. The ugly pig who apparently didn't deserve to stand near beautiful things. That moment at the dessert table was my breaking point, but it was also the moment I decided to stop hiding who I had become. My name is Emma Catherine Morrison, though I was born Emma Hayes. I'm 31 years old now, and this is the story of how being underestimated became my greatest advantage. If you're watching this video, please hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story reaches, because what happened to me happens to so many people. We get judged on our appearance, our background, the size of our bank account, and people make assumptions about our worth based on superficial things. But this is also a story about patience, strategy, and the sweet taste of poetic justice. So stay with me until the end, because the moment when Victoria and Patricia finally understood who I really was, that moment alone was worth every insult I endured. Let me take you back to the beginning. To 7 years ago when I first met Mark Morrison at Ohio State University. We were both seniors studying business administration, both ambitious and driven, but from completely different worlds. Mark came from old money, the kind of wealth that doesn't announce itself with flashy cars or designer logos, but whispers through country club memberships and investment portfolios. His father owned Morrison Investment Partners, a firm that managed wealth for some of the most prominent families in the Midwest. His mother, Patricia, owned Tech Consult Solutions, a medium-sized technology consulting company that had been successful in the early 2000s, but was starting to show cracks by the time I entered the picture. I came from something much simpler. My mother was a high school English teacher in a small town outside Columbus. My father had left when I was 6, and I barely remembered him beyond a vague impression of cigarette smoke and raised voices. My mother raised me alone on a teacher's salary, which meant I learned early how to stretch a dollar, how to work for what I wanted, and how to be grateful for opportunities. I put myself through college on a combination of academic scholarships, student loans, and 3 part-time jobs. When I met Mark in our corporate finance class, I was coming off a double shift at the campus library and a local coffee shop. My clothes were clean but worn, my laptop was 5 years old and held together with duct tape, and I lived in the cheapest apartment I could find with 2 roommates who never cleaned the kitchen. Mark and I were paired together for a semester-long project analyzing investment strategies for emerging tech companies. I still remember the first time we met outside of class to work on the assignment. He suggested a coffee shop near campus, and when I arrived, he was already there with a laptop that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But he wasn't condescending about our different circumstances. He listened when I talked, respected my ideas, and by the end of that first meeting, I felt like I had found someone who saw past the surface. Our study sessions turned into coffee dates, which turned into dinner dates, which turned into something real. Mark was kind and thoughtful, and he had this way of making me feel valued that I hadn't experienced before. He never made me feel poor or less than, at least not in the beginning. The first time I met his family was 6 months into our relationship. Mark had been nervous about it, which should have been my first clue that something was off. He drove me to their house in his BMW, a graduation gift from his parents, and I watched through the window as we left the modest neighborhoods I knew and entered an area where houses sat far back from the road behind gates and circular driveways. The Morrison house wasn't the biggest in the neighborhood, but it was stunning. A colonial-style mansion with white columns and black shutters, surrounded by perfectly manicured lawns that probably required a full-time gardener. I was wearing my best dress, a navy blue number I had found at TJ Maxx for $40, and I had spent an hour on my hair and makeup, determined to make a good impression. Patricia answered the door in casual elegance. Cream-colored slacks and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my entire outfit. She was in her mid-50s then, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and the kind of thin frame that spoke of personal trainers and careful dieting. Her smile was polite but didn't reach her eyes. "Emma, how lovely to meet you," she said, stepping aside to let us in. The house smelled like expensive candles and fresh flowers. Mark's father, Thomas, appeared from what looked like a home office, tall and distinguished with silver hair and a firm handshake. He seemed warmer than Patricia, asking about my major and my plans after graduation. Then Victoria emerged from upstairs, and I got my first look at the woman who would make my life hell for the next 5 years. Victoria was 21 then, 3 years younger than Mark, and she moved through that house like she owned it. She was objectively beautiful in that way that comes from good genes and expensive maintenance. Long dark hair that shone like it had been professionally styled, which it probably had. Flawless skin, designer jeans that hugged her perfectly thin frame, and an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. She looked me up and down when we were introduced, her gaze lingering on my department store dress and my practical shoes. "So you're the girl Mark has been spending all his time with," she said, her tone making it clear that she had expected someone different. "Someone better. Mark talks about you constantly," I replied, trying to be warm and genuine. "He's so proud of you." Victoria's smile was tight. "I'm sure he is. I haven't done anything worth being proud of yet, but when I do, everyone will know about it." That first dinner was uncomfortable in ways I couldn't quite name. The dining room was formal, with a table that could seat 12 and china that looked like it belonged in a museum. Patricia asked questions about my background, and I could feel her cataloging every answer. "Your mother is a teacher? How nice. Public school, I assume? And your father?" I explained that my parents were divorced, that I hadn't seen my father in years. Patricia's expression shifted to something that looked like pity, mixed with disapproval. "How difficult that must have been for you." Mark jumped in then, steering the conversation toward our project, toward my grades, toward anything that would paint me in a better light. But I could see Victoria watching me throughout the meal, a small smirk playing at her lips whenever Patricia made a pointed comment. Thomas was kinder, asking genuine questions about my career aspirations and seeming impressed by my answers. But even his warmth couldn't completely offset the chill coming from the two Morrison women. After dinner, Mark gave me a tour of the house. His childhood bedroom was bigger than my entire apartment, with built-in bookshelves and a window seat overlooking the backyard. Victoria's room was across the hall, and even from the doorway, I could see it was a shrine to privilege. Designer handbags displayed on shelves, a closet that looked like a boutique, and framed photos of Victoria at various glamorous locations. Mark seemed embarrassed by all of it. "I know it's a lot," he said quietly. "My parents are traditional. They have certain expectations." I squeezed his hand. "I'm not trying to impress them. I'm just trying to get to know them." But that wasn't entirely true. I desperately wanted them to like me, to accept me, to see me as worthy of their son. That desperation would haunt me for years. Mark proposed 2 years later, after we had both graduated and started our careers. I was working as a marketing analyst at a mid-tier firm in Columbus, making a decent salary but nothing spectacular. Mark had joined his father's investment company and was being groomed to take over eventually. He proposed on a weekend trip to Chicago, at a nice restaurant overlooking the lake, with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. I cried when I said yes, overwhelmed by the idea that someone like him wanted to build a life with someone like me. When we told his parents, Patricia's reaction was lukewarm at best. "Oh, how lovely," she said, examining the ring on my finger with a critical eye. Have you thought about a timeline? I think we were hoping for next spring, Mark said. Victoria, who was there for the announcement, rolled her eyes dramatically. A spring wedding? How original. Patricia patted Mark's arm. We'll help with the planning, of course. I'm sure Emma's mother has limited resources for this sort of thing. The wedding planning was my first real taste of what life in the Morrison family would be like. My mother and I wanted something simple and meaningful. A ceremony in a nice hotel ballroom with close family and friends. Patricia immediately started pushing for more, suggesting venues we couldn't afford and guest lists that kept expanding. When my mother quietly explained our budget constraints, Patricia's response was to offer to pay for upgrades, but only for the things she wanted. We'll cover the flowers, she said, but I insist on using my florist. They know what they're doing. Every decision became a negotiation, where my preferences were gently but firmly overruled. Victoria attended exactly one wedding planning meeting and spent the entire time on her phone, occasionally looking up to make snide comments. Do you really think carnations are appropriate? I mean, if you're going for a budget look, I suppose they're fine. The wedding itself was beautiful despite all the tension, or perhaps beautiful in spite of it. My mother wore a dress she had saved for months to buy, and she cried when she walked me down the aisle because my father wasn't there to do it. Mark looked at me like I was the only person in the room, and for those few hours, I felt like maybe everything would be okay. But Victoria made sure to comment throughout the reception about the things she found lacking. The venue was nice but not spectacular. The food was adequate but not memorable. The flowers were pretty but not what she would have chosen. She said these things just loud enough for me to overhear, always with a sympathetic tone that made it sound like she was trying to be helpful rather than hurtful. Patricia smiled tightly through most of the ceremony and left immediately after the cake cutting because she had an early morning meeting. Thomas stayed longer and danced with me during the father-daughter dance since my own father was absent. He was kind about it, telling me that I looked beautiful and that Mark was lucky to have me. I held on to those words during the difficult years that followed. The first 3 years of marriage established a pattern that would define my relationship with the Morrison family. Mark and I had dinner at his parents' house twice a month, mandatory family gatherings that I learned to dread. Every dinner followed the same script. Patricia would ask about my job in a tone that made it clear she found marketing analysis quaint and unimpressive. Victoria would talk endlessly about her life, her friends, her latest shopping trips, and her complete lack of any actual responsibilities. She was 24 years old and had never held a real job. She had briefly interned at her mother's company the summer after college, but intern was a generous term for what she actually did. She showed up late, left early, and spent most of her time planning lunch outings with friends. When that ended, Patricia simply deposited money into her account every month, calling it an allowance. Thomas sometimes pushed back gently, suggesting Victoria might benefit from actual work experience. But Patricia always defended her daughter. Victoria is still figuring out what she wants to do, she would say. There's no rush. She's young and should enjoy herself. Meanwhile, everything I did was scrutinized and found wanting. When I got a promotion at work, Patricia's response was polite but dismissive. How nice for you, dear. I'm sure that little bump in salary will help. When I suggested we take a vacation, Victoria laughed. Where would you go? Somewhere domestic, I assume. You probably can't afford Europe. When I wore a new dress to a family dinner, Victoria examined it with theatrical concern. Is that from Macy's? I mean, it's cute if you like that mass market style. Mark defended me sometimes, but more often he stayed silent, and his silence hurt worse than their words. After particularly brutal dinners, I would ask him why he didn't speak up, why he let his mother and sister treat me like I was less than. He always had the same response. They don't mean anything by it. That's just how they are. You're being too sensitive. If I ignore it, you should too. But I wasn't imagining it. The contempt was real and it was constant. At Christmas, Victoria received a new car, a sleek Mercedes SUV with a giant red bow. My gift from Mark's parents was a gift card to HomeGoods. For the home you're building together, Patricia said with a smile. I'm sure you'll find lots of practical items. Victoria's birthday parties were elaborate events with catered food and carefully curated guest lists. For my birthday, we usually just went to dinner, often with Victoria coming along and complaining about the restaurant choice. When Victoria decided she wanted to take up photography as a hobby, Patricia bought her a $5,000 camera and paid for private lessons. When I mentioned wanting to take some business courses to advance my career, the suggestion was met with silence. Mark's sister is exploring her creative side, Patricia explained to someone at a party I overheard. It's important to nurture artistic talents. Emma is more practical, more focused on career advancement. Different priorities for different people. The worst part was how they made me feel complicit in my own diminishment. Every time I laughed at Victoria's jokes, even when they were at my expense. Every time I thanked Patricia for her thinly veiled insults as if they were genuine compliments. Every time I stayed quiet to keep the peace, I felt myself becoming smaller. Mark noticed the change in me. "You're not as happy as you used to be," he said one night after a particularly difficult family dinner. "I'm fine," I lied, because what else could I say? "Your family treats me like I'm tolerable at best and an embarrassment at worst?" That conversation would have required him to acknowledge what I was experiencing, and he had proven repeatedly that he wasn't willing to do that. So I stayed quiet and I stayed small, and I told myself that this was what compromise looked like in a marriage, what none of them knew, what I had told no one except the few people who needed to know, was that I had started building something in secret. It began 3.5 years into my marriage, during a weekend when Mark was on a business trip and I had the apartment to myself. I had been working on a marketing campaign for a client at my firm, and I kept running into the same problem. The analytics tools we were using were outdated and clunky, requiring multiple platforms and manual data integration. I spent hours every week compiling reports that should have been automated. Out of frustration and curiosity, I started researching whether better solutions existed. What I found was disappointing. The market was full of either expensive enterprise software that small and medium businesses couldn't afford, or cheap tools that didn't actually solve the core problems. There was a gap in the market, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had always been good with data and analysis, and I had taken several coding courses in college just because I found them interesting. That weekend, I started sketching out what an ideal analytics platform would look like. Something intuitive enough for non-technical users, but powerful enough to handle complex data. Something affordable for smaller businesses but scalable for growing companies. Something that could integrate multiple data streams and produce meaningful insights without requiring a team of data scientists. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that I could build it. Not alone, obviously. I would need developers and designers and people much smarter than me in specific technical areas. But I could be the one to envision it, to understand what the market needed, to bridge the gap between technical capability and practical application. For weeks, I did nothing but think about it. I was afraid to start, afraid to fail, afraid to let myself hope that I could create something meaningful. Then one night at another Morrison family dinner, Victoria was going on and on about a new handbag she'd bought. A $5,000 piece of leather and metal that she described as an investment piece. Patricia nodded approvingly. "Quality pieces retain their value," she said. "Emma, you should consider investing in some better accessories. Your work bag looks like you bought it at Target." "Actually, I did buy it at Target," I said quietly. "It was on sale for $40, and it holds everything I need." Victoria laughed. "Exactly my point. You get what you pay for. No offense, but you'll never be taken seriously carrying that around." Something clicked in that moment. I was never going to be good enough for these people, no matter what I did. I could spend my entire life trying to meet their standards, and I would always fall short because the problem wasn't me. The problem was that they had decided I was beneath them, and nothing would change their minds. So why was I still trying? Why was I making myself smaller to fit into their narrow definition of acceptable? That night, I went home and registered my first LLC. I used my maiden name, Hayes, to keep it separate from my married identity. Hayes Analytics Solutions. I designed a simple logo, built a basic website, and started the long process of turning my idea into reality. The first year was slow and discouraging. I worked my regular job during the day and spent every evening and weekend on my company. I taught myself more advanced coding, watched endless tutorials, and slowly started building a prototype of the software I had envisioned. I used my savings to hire a freelance developer in Ukraine who could help with the more complex technical aspects. I told Mark I was taking online business courses to advance my career, which wasn't entirely a lie. I was learning more about business than I ever had in school, just by doing it. He was supportive in an abstract way, occasionally asking how my courses were going, but never digging deeper. His family had no idea I was doing anything beyond my regular job, and I wanted to keep it that way. I had learned that any dream I shared with them would be diminished or dismissed, so I simply stopped sharing. The breakthrough came 18 months after I started. I had finally developed a working prototype of the software, and I reached out to 3 small business owners I knew through my regular job. I offered to let them test the platform for free in exchange for feedback. All 3 agreed, mostly as a favor to me, but within 2 weeks, their feedback was enthusiastic. "This is exactly what we needed," one of them told me. "How much are you going to charge for this?" I had spent months researching pricing models, trying to find the sweet spot between affordable and sustainable. I quoted them a price that was a fraction of what enterprise solutions cost, but enough to start building revenue. All 3 signed contracts immediately. Within a month, they had referred me to other business owners. By the end of that first year of actually having clients, I had 12 companies paying monthly subscriptions. It wasn't much, maybe $20,000 in annual revenue, but it was real. My idea was working. I hired my first employee, a part-time customer support person, and then a second developer to help improve the platform. I reinvested every penny back into the company. Mark noticed that I was spending a lot of time on my laptop in the evenings, but when he asked about it, I kept my answers vague. Just working on some projects, I would say. Trying to build my skills? He seemed satisfied with that explanation. Or maybe he was just too focused on his own career to push harder. His mother would occasionally make comments about how much time I spent working. "You should take better care of yourself, Emma. All that computer time will give you wrinkles." Victoria's contribution was more direct. "Mark says you're always on your laptop now. That's kind of rude, don't you think? Like you're too important to talk to your own husband." The second year, revenue jumped to $200,000. I quit my regular job, telling Mark and his family that I had been promoted to a remote consulting position with more flexibility. They believed it because it fit their narrative of me as a worker bee, competent but unremarkable, doing practical things while the truly special people like Victoria explored their creativity. I moved my operations to a small office space that I rented month to month, keeping my expenses lean and my profile low. I hired a chief technology officer, a brilliant woman named Sarah Chen, who had left a big tech company because she was tired of corporate politics. She saw the potential in what I was building and agreed to join for equity and a modest salary. Together, we started improving the platform, adding features, refining the user experience, and most importantly, making it scalable. By the third year, we had 85 clients and revenue hit $2 million. I hired a small team of developers, a head of sales, and a marketing manager. I incorporated properly, setting up an LLC that could handle real growth. I still used my maiden name for everything business-related, and I was extremely careful about keeping my 2 lives separate. None of my business contacts knew I was married to a Morrison. None of the Morrisons knew I was running a successful tech company. I existed in 2 completely different worlds, and I told myself I was protecting both. Protecting my business from the potential taint of being seen as a rich girl playing entrepreneur with family money. Protecting myself from the Morrison family's inevitable attempt to diminish what I had built. The truth was more complicated than protection. I was also building proof, evidence that I was more than they thought I was, more than they had allowed me to be. Every client I signed, every dollar of revenue I generated, every employee I hired became part of a story I was writing in secret. A story where I was the protagonist, not the supporting character in Victoria's drama or the disappointment in Patricia's social circle. I was becoming someone powerful and successful, and they had no idea. That secrecy gave me strength during the increasingly difficult family gatherings. When Victoria complained about how exhausting it was to have so many social obligations, I thought about the 80-hour weeks I was working. When Patricia commented on my off-the-rack clothes, I thought about the payroll I was meeting and the employees whose families depended on the company I had built. When Mark absently agreed with his mother's latest criticism of me, I thought about the board meetings where my opinions shaped the direction of a multi-million-dollar enterprise. The engagement announcement came during a Sunday dinner at the Morrison house. Mark and I had just arrived when Victoria practically bounced into the foyer, her left hand extended to show off a massive diamond ring. "Charles proposed last night," she squealed, turning her hand so the stone caught the light. "We're getting married next summer." Patricia burst into tears of joy, pulling Victoria into an embrace. "My baby girl, I'm so happy for you." Thomas shook Charles's hand, welcoming him to the family with genuine warmth. Charles Worthington came from a family that made the Morrisons look middle class. His father owned a chain of luxury boutique hotels across the Midwest, and Charles himself worked in private wealth management, handling portfolios for clients with a minimum of $20 million in assets. He was handsome in a generic way, with perfect teeth and carefully styled blonde hair, and he treated Victoria with the kind of reverence she clearly felt she deserved. The wedding planning consumed the next 8 months. Every family dinner became a wedding planning session. Victoria had opinions about everything, and Patricia enabled every extravagant idea. The budget ballooned to over $500,000. The guest list expanded to 300 people. The venue was the most exclusive country club in Columbus, with a year-long waiting list that Patricia bypassed through connections. Victoria selected a designer gown that cost more than most people's cars. She hired a wedding planner who specialized in celebrity weddings. She created a wedding website with engagement photos that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Every detail was documented on her social media, every decision analyzed and discussed at length. Mark was asked to be a groomsman since Charles needed even numbers for the wedding party. When I asked Victoria if she wanted me to be a bridesmaid, her response was delivered with a saccharine smile. "Oh, Emma, that's so sweet of you to offer, but I've already chosen my bridesmaids. They're my closest friends from childhood and college. I'm sure you understand. I need people who photograph well. The wedding aesthetic is very important to me." The insult was clear, but delivered in a way that made it difficult to object without seeming oversensitive. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "I completely understand. You want your day to be perfect." "Exactly," Victoria said, her relief palpable. "I knew you would get it. You're always so practical about these things." Patricia, who was sitting right there during this exchange, said nothing. She simply sipped her wine and changed the subject to floral arrangements. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, his version of an apology, but he didn't speak up. He never spoke up. That night, I went home and looked at my company's financial statements. We had just closed our first $1 million client, a regional healthcare system that needed analytics for patient satisfaction and operational efficiency. My company was growing faster than I had projected. My team was talented and dedicated. My product was solving real problems for real businesses. And yet here I was, being told I wasn't pretty enough to stand in a wedding party. The exclusion continued throughout the wedding planning process. Victoria organized a bridal shower at a luxury spa and didn't invite me. I found out about it from Mark, who mentioned it casually. When I asked why I hadn't been included, he was confused. "I thought you knew about it." Victoria said she told you. She hadn't. The bachelorette party was even worse. Victoria took 15 of her closest friends to a resort in Miami for a long weekend. The photos flooded social media, all of them showing beautiful women in designer beachwear, drinking cocktails and celebrating. I watched from my office in Columbus, working on a pitch for a potential investor while Victoria posed for pictures she would later use to illustrate her perfect life. Mark tried to defend his sister. She wanted it to be intimate, just her really close friends. "You understand, right?" "No," I said quietly. "I don't understand. I'm your wife. I'm family. She's my sister-in-law whether she likes it or not." Mark sighed heavily, a sound I had come to hate. "Can you please not make this difficult? The wedding is stressful enough without family drama." Family drama. That's what he called his sister's deliberate cruelty and his mother's tacit approval, as if I was the one creating problems by having feelings about being excluded and insulted. I stopped bringing it up after that. I let them plan their perfect wedding while I focused on my imperfect but real company. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria was spending $500,000 on one day, money provided entirely by her parents and Charles's family. I was building something sustainable, something that employed 15 people and generated real value. But in the Morrison family hierarchy, her accomplishments were celebrated while mine remained invisible. During this same period, I was also learning things about Patricia's company that she didn't know I knew. One of my clients casually mentioned that they had considered using tech consult solutions, but had gone with a competitor because Patricia's firm seemed outdated. Their proposals still reference technology from 5 years ago, the client said. It's like they stopped innovating. I started paying attention to industry news about tech consult solutions. The company wasn't in crisis yet, but the signs were there for anyone looking. They had lost 2 major clients in the past year. Their website hadn't been updated in 18 months. Their social media presence was sporadic and unprofessional. When I looked at their leadership team, it was clear that Patricia had surrounded herself with people who wouldn't challenge her. The company was coasting on reputation and relationships, but that strategy had an expiration date. In the tech world, if you're not evolving, you're dying. I mentioned this to Mark one evening, carefully framing it as concern. Has your mom talked about how the business is doing? I heard some companies in that space are struggling. Mark shrugged. She doesn't really discuss work with me. I'm sure she's fine. She's been running that company for 20 years. If there were problems, she would handle them. His confidence in his mother's business acumen was touching but misplaced. Patricia was smart and well-connected, but she had built her success during a time when those qualities were enough. The market had changed. Technology had changed. Customer expectations had changed. Patricia hadn't. 2 months before Victoria's wedding, I received a call from a venture capital firm in Chicago. They had found my company through a client referral and wanted to discuss a potential investment. The partner I spoke with was named David Chen, and he was exactly the kind of investor I had hoped to attract eventually. Experienced in B2B software, well-connected in the industry, and genuinely interested in the problem we were solving rather than just the potential returns. We had 3 calls over 2 weeks, during which I walked him through our business model, our growth trajectory, our competitive advantages, and our vision for scaling. The final call was brief and life-changing. We want to lead your Series B round, David said. We're proposing a $50 million investment at a valuation of $200 million. That would give us 25% equity and a board seat. The terms are in the email I just sent you. Take your time reviewing with your lawyer, but, Emma, I want you to know that we're betting on you as much as we're betting on the product. You've built something impressive here. I hung up and sat in my office for 20 minutes, processing what had just happened. My company, the idea I had started building in secret 3.5 years ago, was now valued at $200 million. The investment would give me the capital to expand aggressively, to hire the team we needed, to build out the product roadmap we had been planning. More than that, it was validation. Real validation from people who understood the market and evaluated companies professionally. This wasn't family obligation or social courtesy. This was merit-based recognition of what I had accomplished. I called Sarah, my CTO, and we celebrated over video chat. She was in California visiting family, but her excitement came through clearly. Emma, do you understand what this means? This puts us in the conversation with the major players. This makes us legitimate. We're not just a scrappy startup anymore. We're a serious company with serious backing. I knew what she meant, but I also knew something she didn't. This validation was about to collide with my other life, the one where I was just Mark's unremarkable wife, the one where I was too plain to be in wedding photos. The weeks leading up to Victoria's wedding were a blur of final preparations, last-minute, crises that weren't actually crises, and mounting tension. Victoria had a meltdown about the shade of pink in the bridesmaids' dresses. Patricia spent thousands of dollars on upgraded floral arrangements because the originals weren't impressive enough. Charles's mother kept suggesting changes to the ceremony program. Through it all, Mark was pulled in different directions, trying to keep everyone happy while maintaining his groomsman duties. I stayed on the periphery, helping when asked, but mostly trying to stay out of the way. My role had been made clear. I was expected to attend, to dress appropriately, but not too noticeably, to be pleasant and forgettable. I was background decoration in Victoria's production. The seating chart revealed my exact place in the family hierarchy. I was assigned to Table 17, far from the family tables, surrounded by distant relatives and obligation guests. When Mark saw the placement, he looked uncomfortable. "Maybe I can ask Victoria to move you closer." I shook my head. "Don't bother, it's fine." "It's not fine," he insisted, showing a rare flash of anger. "You're my wife. You should be at the family table." But he didn't actually do anything about it, and I was left at table 17. The day before the wedding, I had a video call with David Chen and his partners to finalize the investment terms. We signed the paperwork electronically, and the funds would be transferred within a week. During the call, David mentioned that they were announcing the investment through a press release that would go out Monday morning. "We've already briefed the business journalists at the major outlets," he said. "This is a significant deal in the B2B software space. Expect some attention." I thought about timing. Monday morning, the press release would go out while Victoria and Charles would be on their honeymoon. The wedding would be over. The perfect moment would have passed. But I also knew that my time for hiding was ending. The investment was too big and too public to keep quiet. My two lives were about to collide whether I was ready or not. I spent that evening in my home office, preparing myself mentally for what was coming. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't plotting anything vindictive. I was simply going to stop hiding who I had become. The morning of Victoria's wedding arrived with perfect weather, sunny and warm, with just enough breeze to be pleasant. Mark left early for groomsman duties, kissing me goodbye and reminding me that the ceremony started at 4. I spent the morning working, reviewing some final details with Sarah about the investment announcement and responding to client emails. At noon, I started getting ready, taking my time with hair and makeup. I had bought a new dress for the occasion. Nothing too flashy, but nicer than what I usually wore. It was a deep emerald green that complemented my complexion, fitted but not tight, elegant but not showy. I wanted to look good, not for Victoria or Patricia, but for myself. I wanted to feel like I belonged there, even though I knew I would be treated like an outsider. The country club was spectacular when I arrived. White tents had been erected on the lawn for the cocktail hour and reception. Thousands of flowers created an enchanted garden atmosphere. A string quartet played classical music as guests arrived. Valet attendants in crisp uniforms parked cars while ushers in matching tuxedos directed guests to the ceremony space. I walked through the crowd alone since Mark was with the wedding party. Everywhere I looked, I saw wealth and privilege. Women in designer gowns that cost thousands of dollars, men in custom-tailored suits, jewelry that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. These were Victoria's people, Charles's people, the social circle that the Morrison family had cultivated for decades. I recognized some faces from previous family events, people who had looked through me as if I were invisible. I found my assigned seat in the back section of the ceremony space, far from the family rows that had been reserved with silk ribbons. The chairs were white with elaborate bows, arranged in perfect rows facing an altar decorated with cascading flowers. I sat down and watched as the space filled with guests, noting how the closer seats filled with people who clearly knew each other well, exchanging air kisses and animated conversations. A woman in the row ahead of me turned around and smiled politely. "Are you a friend of the bride or groom?" "Neither," I said. "I'm Mark Morrison's wife." "Mark is the groom's brother." Her expression shifted slightly, confusion crossing her features. "Oh, I didn't realize Mark was married. How long have you been together?" 7 years. Married for 5, I replied, used to this reaction. The woman nodded and turned back around, clearly losing interest. This was my life in the Morrison family, perpetually introduced but never remembered, present but not acknowledged. The ceremony began with appropriate grandeur. The wedding party processed down the aisle to live orchestral music. Mark looked handsome in his tuxedo, serious and focused on his duties. The bridesmaids were all tall and thin, wearing blush-pink gowns that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Then came Victoria, escorted by Thomas, and even I had to admit she looked stunning. Her dress was a masterpiece of lace and silk, fitted perfectly to her frame, with a cathedral train that seemed to float behind her. Her makeup was flawless, her hair arranged in an elaborate updo decorated with tiny pearls. She glowed with happiness and satisfaction, the princess in her fairy tale finally getting her perfect day. Charles waited at the altar with an expression of devoted admiration. The ceremony was traditional and elegant, exactly what you would expect from two wealthy families joining together. I watched it all from my back row seat, feeling disconnected from the spectacle. The officiant spoke about love and commitment, about two families becoming one, about the importance of supporting each other through life's challenges. I thought about my own wedding, small and simple, where Victoria had complained about every detail and Patricia had left early. I thought about the 5 years since then, the countless dinners where I had been dismissed and diminished, the constant message that I wasn't good enough for this family. And I thought about Monday morning when the press release would go out, when the world would learn about the company I had built and the success I had achieved. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired of being invisible. The ceremony concluded with the traditional kiss and the recessional. Victoria and Charles walked back down the aisle to applause and cheers, her train flowing behind her like a river of silk. The wedding party followed, Mark passing my row without seeming to notice me in the crowd. Then came the parents, Patricia on Thomas's arm, both of them beaming with pride and satisfaction. Their daughter had married well, had created the social event of the season, had done everything expected of her. The cocktail hour was held in the garden area, with multiple bars serving premium liquor and waiters circulating with elaborate hors d'oeuvres. I wandered through the crowd, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server and trying to look purposeful. Small groups had formed naturally, people who knew each other clustering together in animated conversation. I spotted Mark across the garden, surrounded by other groomsmen and their dates, laughing at something someone had said. I started to walk toward him, but Victoria intercepted me near one of the bars. She was holding court with her bridesmaids, all of them with champagne flutes and expressions of delighted exhaustion. "Emma," Victoria said when she saw me, her voice carrying that false sweetness I knew so well. "You came." "Of course I came," I replied evenly. "It's a beautiful ceremony." Victoria beamed. "Isn't it perfect?" Everything turned out exactly how I envisioned. Her bridesmaids murmured agreement, all of them clearly already drunk on champagne and the intoxicating atmosphere of an extravagant wedding. One of them, a tall blonde whose name I couldn't remember, looked at me with undisguised curiosity. "How do you know Victoria?" "I'm her sister-in-law," I explained. "I'm married to Mark." The blonde's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, I didn't know Mark was married." Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Emma keeps a low profile. She's very private." The conversation moved on, the bridesmaids pulling Victoria back into their circle, and I was dismissed without ceremony. I watched them laugh and pose for photos, thinking about how Victoria had just described me. Private, as if my absence from her social media and her inner circle was my choice rather than her deliberate exclusion. I finished my champagne and got another, deciding that if I was going to endure this wedding, I might as well be slightly buzzed. The announcement came that dinner was being served, and guests began moving toward the reception tent. I found table 17 easily enough. It was positioned near the back of the tent, far from the head table where Victoria and Charles would sit, far from the family tables where Patricia and Thomas and Mark would be seated. My table mates were exactly what I expected. Distant cousins of Charles's family who barely knew the bride and groom, an elderly couple who seemed confused about why they were there, and a few business associates of Charles's father who were clearly attending out of obligation rather than desire. The conversation was stilted and uncomfortable. Everyone was making small talk about the weather, the venue, how beautiful the bride looked. No one asked about my connection to the family. No one seemed particularly interested in getting to know each other. We were the forgotten guests, the people who filled out the seating chart but didn't matter to the actual celebration. Dinner was served in courses, each more elaborate than the last. Lobster bisque, filet mignon with truffle butter, roasted vegetables that had probably been flown in from somewhere exotic. The wine flowed freely, and I took advantage of it, letting the alcohol dull the edge of my discomfort. From my distant table, I watched the head table where Victoria and Charles sat surrounded by their wedding party. I watched Mark laugh at something one of the other groomsmen said. I watched Patricia and Thomas at their table, accepting congratulations from a steady stream of guests who stopped by to offer their regards. The toasts began after dinner. Charles's father spoke first, welcoming Victoria into the family and talking about the joy of seeing his son so happy. Thomas went next, telling stories about Victoria as a little girl and getting emotional about watching her grow into a beautiful woman. Mark gave a toast as well, something short and sweet about Charles being lucky to marry his sister and Victoria, deserving all the happiness in the world. There was no mention of me, no acknowledgement that Mark had his own marriage, his own partnership. It was as if I didn't exist. The dancing started after the toasts, with Victoria and Charles taking the floor for their first dance to some romantic ballad I didn't recognize. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. The bridesmaids watched with expressions of dreamy satisfaction. Then came the parent dances, Victoria with Thomas, Charles with his mother. The whole production was carefully choreographed, each moment designed for maximum emotional impact and photographic potential. I stayed at my table, watching from the shadows, finishing my third glass of wine. Mark found me eventually, looking slightly guilty as he approached. "Hey, I've been looking for you." "I'm right where the seating chart said I would be," I replied, hearing the edge in my voice. Mark winced. "I know. I'm sorry about that. Victoria was very specific about the arrangements." "She always is," I said. "Are you having fun? It's a beautiful wedding." "You look nice," he offered, clearly trying to shift the conversation to safer ground. "Thank you. You look handsome." There was an awkward pause. "Do you want to dance?" "Not really," I said honestly. "I'm fine here." Mark looked around the tent, seeming to notice for the first time how far away from everything my table was positioned. "This isn't right. You shouldn't be stuck back here." "But I am stuck back here," I pointed out. "And making a scene about it now won't change anything. Let's just get through the rest of the night." Mark opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "Okay, I need to get back to the wedding party table. We're taking photos in a few minutes. I'll find you later." He disappeared back into the crowd, and I was alone again with my uncomfortable table mates and my growing resentment. The evening wore on with more dancing, more drinking, more celebration of Victoria's perfect day. I watched it all from my distant table, feeling increasingly disconnected from everything happening around me. At one point, Patricia stopped by my table, probably making rounds to greet all the guests. "Emma, dear, are you enjoying yourself?" "It's a beautiful wedding," I said, the same response I had given everyone. "Victoria worked so hard on all the details." Patricia smiled, that tight smile that never reached her eyes. "She did. She has such exquisite taste. Everything had to be perfect." She glanced around the table, taking in my forgettable table mates and the table's distant location. "I hope you're comfortable back here. We had to make some difficult decisions about seating arrangements with such a large guest list." "I'm fine," I assured her, not trusting myself to say more. Patricia patted my shoulder in a gesture that felt more condescending than comforting and moved on to the next table. I watched her work the room, greeting guests with practiced charm, playing the role of proud mother of the bride to perfection. The cake cutting happened around 9 o'clock. Another elaborate production with a 5-tiered confection decorated with sugar flowers that probably took days to create. Victoria and Charles posed for photos, feeding each other small bites while photographers captured every angle. The dessert course was served, individual plates of cake along with other sweet options, all arranged beautifully on china plates with gold trim. I picked at mine, the sugar tasting oddly bitter despite its sweetness. The evening was winding down. Some of the older guests had already started leaving, thanking the bride and groom and making their way to the valet stand. The dance floor was still crowded with Victoria's friends and younger guests, but the energy had shifted from formal celebration to loose party. I decided to get some fresh air, walking out of the tent toward the dessert table that had been set up in an adjacent area. It was quieter there, away from the music and the crowd. Just me and the elaborate display of cookies, chocolates, and other treats arranged on multiple tiers. I stood there looking at the dessert display, admiring the artistry of it despite everything else. Someone had spent hours creating sugar sculptures and delicate pastries, arranging everything to look like an edible garden. I was reaching for a chocolate truffle when I heard voices behind me, loud and getting louder. I turned to see Victoria approaching with her entourage of bridesmaids, all of them visibly drunk now, stumbling slightly in their heels and laughing too loudly at things that probably weren't that funny. A photographer trailed behind them, his camera raised, trying to capture candid moments of the bride enjoying her reception. Victoria saw me standing near the dessert table, and her expression shifted, something sharp and cruel flashing across her face. The champagne had loosened whatever filter she normally maintained, and I could see in her eyes that she was about to say something she had probably been thinking for years. "Move aside, you ugly pig," Victoria said, her voice loud enough that at least 20 or 30 people nearby could hear clearly. "You're blocking the photographer's shot. We need pictures of beautiful people with beautiful things." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flush hot with humiliation. Around us, conversation stopped. People turned to stare. Some looked shocked, others amused, a few clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Victoria's bridesmaids giggled, one of them stage whispering, harsh but fair. The photographer looked down at his camera, obviously uncomfortable, but not willing to defend someone he didn't know against the bride on her wedding day. I stood frozen for a moment, the chocolate truffle still in my hand, my mind processing what had just happened. This wasn't a private insult delivered with plausible deniability. This was a public humiliation, deliberate and cruel, designed to put me in my place in front of witnesses. I stepped away from the dessert table, my legs feeling unsteady, and Victoria immediately moved into the space I had vacated, posing with her bridesmaids while the photographer snapped pictures. I could hear people murmuring around me. Someone said, "Did she really just say that?" Another person laughed nervously. Most just stared or looked away, embarrassed to have witnessed such naked cruelty, but not willing to acknowledge it directly. I walked away from the dessert area, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall. Not here, not in front of these people, not at Victoria's perfect wedding where I was already invisible. I found a quiet corner near the coat check area and pulled out my phone with shaking hands. The anger was building now, replacing the initial shock and humiliation. For 5 years, I had endured their dismissiveness, their casual cruelty, their constant message that I wasn't good enough. I had stayed quiet to keep the peace, had made myself smaller to accommodate their egos, had hidden my success to avoid threatening their narrative. But standing there with Victoria's words still ringing in my ears, something fundamental shifted inside me. I was done. I was done being their punching bag, done accepting their version of who I was, done pretending that their opinions mattered. I made 3 phone calls in quick succession. First to my lawyer, Jennifer Martinez, who answered on the second ring despite it being Saturday evening. "Jennifer, I need you to move forward with everything we discussed. The press release, the announcement, all of it. I want it to go out first thing Monday morning, but I also want you to prepare a more immediate strategy. I'm done hiding." Her response was professional and efficient. "I'll have everything ready by tomorrow afternoon. Are you sure about the timing?" "Completely sure," I said. The second call was to Sarah, my CTO. "The investment announcement goes out Monday as planned. But I need you to prepare a full company overview. Client list, revenue figures, everything that demonstrates what we've built. I want documentation ready to share." Sarah's voice was concerned. "Emma, what happened? Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine," I assured her. "Everything is actually about to get much better." The third call was to Marcus Webb, a publicist I had hired the previous month to help manage the media attention around the investment announcement. "Marcus, I need you to accelerate our timeline, and I need you to get creative. I want maximum visibility for Monday's announcement." Mark found me as I was finishing the last call. He looked distressed, his tie loosened and his hair slightly disheveled. "Mom told me what Victoria said. I'm so sorry. I came looking for you right away." "Did you hear it yourself?" I asked. "Or did someone tell you?" "I heard it," he admitted quietly. "I was on the other side of the tent, but I heard her voice and I heard people reacting. Emma, she's drunk. She didn't mean it." "She meant every word," I said calmly. "And your mother's response, according to multiple people I've now heard from, was to tell Victoria, not at your wedding, later. Which means the insult was fine, just poorly timed." Mark reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to get my coat and call an Uber and go home," I said. "You should get back to your groomsman duties. The night isn't over." "You can't just leave," Mark protested. "It's my sister's wedding. People will notice." "Let them notice," I replied. "Let them wonder why Mark Morrison's wife left early. Maybe someone will tell them it's because the bride called her an ugly pig in front of 30 witnesses and nobody defended her, not even her husband. That's not fair, Mark said, his voice rising slightly. I'm in the wedding party. I can't just make a scene. I'm not asking you to make a scene, I said quietly. I'm telling you that I'm leaving. You can stay or come with me. That's your choice. But Mark, understand this. Things are going to change. Tomorrow, next week, everything is going to be different. I'm done accepting how your family treats me. He stared at me, confusion and concern warring on his face. What does that mean? What are you talking about? You'll see, I said. Monday morning, you're going to see who I really am, who I've been this whole time. And so will your mother and your sister and everyone else who decided I was nothing. I walked away before he could respond, collected my coat, and stepped outside into the cool evening air. The valet brought my car, and I drove home alone, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind already 3 steps ahead. I spent the rest of that night and all of Sunday in my home office working with Jennifer and Marcus to refine our strategy. The press release was finalized, emphasizing not just the investment, but the journey of building a successful tech company from scratch. Marcus had connections with several business journalists who were interested in the story, particularly the angle of a female founder in the B2B software space. We prepared a full media kit with professional photos, detailed company information, client testimonials, and my personal story. Jennifer drafted legal documents protecting my company assets and establishing clear boundaries between my business and any potential family entanglements. By Sunday evening, everything was ready. Mark came home late from whatever post-wedding brunch or gathering Victoria had organized. He found me in the office, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups. We need to talk, he said, leaning against the doorframe. Yes, we do, I agreed, turning to face him. But first, I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago. Over the next hour, I explained everything. The company I had started 3.5 years ago, the revenue we were generating, the team I had built, the investment we had just secured, the valuation that put my company at $200 million. Mark's expressions cycled through disbelief, shock, confusion, and something that might have been hurt. You've been running a company this whole time, and you never told me? You told me you were taking online courses, that you were working on projects. You lied to me. I didn't lie, I said carefully. I told you I was working on business projects, which was true. I just didn't give you the full details. Why? Mark demanded, and I could hear genuine pain in his voice. Why would you hide something like this from me? Because I needed to know it was real before I told anyone, I said. Because I needed to build something that was completely mine, that nobody could diminish or take credit for or explain away. And because, honestly, I didn't trust your family not to poison it somehow. That's harsh, Mark said. Is it? I challenged. Your mother has made it clear for 5 years that she thinks I'm beneath you. Your sister just called me an ugly pig in front of dozens of people at her wedding. Every success I've had has been minimized, every achievement treated as cute, but ultimately insignificant. If I had told your family 3 years ago that I was starting a company, what do you think they would have said? Mark was quiet for a long moment. They would have been dismissive, he finally admitted. Mom would have made some comment about it being a hobby. Victoria would have made jokes. I get it. You get it now, I said. But you didn't get it for 5 years. You didn't defend me when they dismissed me. You told me I was being too sensitive when I pointed out their cruelty. You chose peace over protecting me over and over again. I know, Mark said, and he looked genuinely devastated. I was wrong. I was a coward. I let them treat you badly because it was easier than standing up to them. I'm so sorry, Emma. I appreciate that, I said, and I meant it. But apologies don't erase the past. They don't undo the damage, and they don't change what happens next. What happens next? He asked quietly. Monday morning, the press release goes out announcing my company's $50 million investment round. By Monday afternoon, every business publication in the Midwest will have covered it. By Monday evening, everyone your family knows will know that the unremarkable daughter-in-law they've been dismissing is actually a successful CEO. Mark absorbed this information slowly. And my mom's company? I've been watching it decline for months, I said. They're losing clients, losing relevance, losing money. Patricia is too proud to admit she needs help, but the reality is that Tech Consult Solutions is probably 6 months from bankruptcy without intervention. The coincidence seemed to hit Mark all at once. Your company is in the same industry as my mom's. Exactly, I said. And in about 2 weeks, after the dust settles from the investment announcement, my board and I are going to approach your mother about a potential acquisition. You're going to buy her company, Mark said, and I couldn't read his expression. It's a good business decision, I explained. Her client relationships and reputation combined with our technology and growth trajectory, it's a strategic fit. But yes, there's also a personal element. Your mother is going to have to choose between pride and survival, and she's going to have to make that choice with me. The woman she dismissed, the ugly pig her daughter mocked, the person she thought was beneath your family. Monday morning arrived with crystalline clarity. I dressed carefully in a tailored suit, styled my hair professionally, and put on the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're about to change everything. The press release went out at 8 a.m. through Business Wire and simultaneously to a carefully curated list of journalists Marcus had been cultivating. By 9 a.m., my phone was ringing constantly. By 10 a.m., the first articles appeared online. Tech startup secures $50 million in Series B funding, led by Chen Ventures, read one headline. Female founders analytics company valued at $200 million, read another. The articles included my professional headshot, quotes from David Chen about why they invested, details about our client list and growth trajectory, and my personal story about building the company from scratch while working full-time. One particularly good article from a business reporter Marcus knew well led with the angle of a bootstrapped startup becoming a major player in the B2B software space. Mark called me at 10:30. His voice was strained. Emma, I just saw the articles. Everyone at my office is talking about it. My dad called me asking if I knew, if this was real. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him it was absolutely real, and that I was proud of you, Mark said, which I am. I'm proud and amazed and honestly a little intimidated. My wife is a CEO of a company worth more than my entire family's net worth combined. Your mother called me 3 times, he continued. I haven't answered. I don't know what to say to her. You don't have to say anything yet, I told him. Let her process. Let them all process. The call I was waiting for came at 1:15 p.m. Patricia's number appeared on my screen, and I let it ring 3 times before answering. Patricia, I said calmly. Emma, her voice was tight and controlled, but I could hear the shock underneath. I've been seeing articles all morning about a company called Hayes Analytics Solutions, with your picture, explaining that you're the founder and CEO. Yes, I confirmed. That's my company. I founded it 3.5 years ago. There was a long silence. When Patricia spoke again, her voice had changed, become harder. So you've been lying to us, to Mark, to the whole family. I've been private about my business ventures, I said evenly. Which is different from lying. I told Mark I was working on business projects, which was true. I simply didn't provide details. And why is that? Patricia asked, her tone sharp. Why would you hide such a significant accomplishment? Because every time I've shared anything with your family, it's been dismissed or minimized or used as a weapon, I replied, letting some steel into my voice. Because Victoria makes jokes about my appearance and my background and my worth, and you enable her. Because you've spent 5 years making it clear that you think I'm not good enough for your son. So I built something that was entirely mine, something you couldn't touch or diminish. And now it's worth more than everything your family has built. The silence that followed was thick with tension. You're angry about what Victoria said at the wedding, Patricia finally said. She was drunk, she apologized. She sent a text that said, sorry if I offended you, I corrected. That's not an apology. That's a deflection. And no, I'm not doing this because of what she said Saturday. I'm doing this because I'm tired of hiding who I am to make your family comfortable. Patricia's voice turned cold. What exactly are you doing, Emma? Just succeeding, I said simply. Very publicly and very successfully. But there's something else you should know. My board and I have been watching your company. Tech Consult Solutions is struggling, Patricia. You've lost major clients. Your technology is outdated. Your revenue is down significantly. Without intervention, you're looking at bankruptcy or a fire sale acquisition within 6 months. How dare you? Patricia hissed. That's none of your concern. It became my concern when I realized my company could benefit from acquiring yours, I said. Your client relationships and industry reputation, combined with our technology and growth trajectory, it's a smart strategic move. So in about 2 weeks, after the media attention from our funding round dies down, I'm going to make you a formal offer to acquire Tech Consult Solutions. You're serious, Patricia said, and I could hear the disbelief. Completely serious, I confirmed. I'll pay fair market value, which given your current situation won't be what you're hoping for. Your staff will be retained. The company will continue as a division of Hayes Analytics, and you'll have the option to stay on as a consultant for a transition period. But make no mistake, Patricia. This will be my company, my vision, my leadership. I'm offering to save what you built, but on my terms. I hung up before she could respond, my hands completely steady. The acquisition offer was delivered to Patricia exactly 2 weeks later. Jennifer handled it with perfect professional courtesy, presenting a comprehensive proposal that outlined the terms, the valuation, the transition plan, and the strategic rationale. The offer was for $2.7 million, which I knew would feel insultingly low to Patricia, given that her company had once been valued at $15 million. Jennifer called me 2 days after delivering the offer. Patricia wants to meet with you directly, she reported. She's reviewed the terms with her lawyer and her accountant, and they've apparently advised her that your offer is reasonable given market conditions. But she wants to discuss it face to face. Of course she does, I said. Set it up for next week. Neutral location, professional setting. This is a business meeting, not a family dinner. The meeting took place in a conference room at Jennifer's law office downtown. Patricia arrived with her lawyer, a man in his 60s who looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. I arrived with Jennifer and Sarah presenting a united front. Patricia looked older than she had at Victoria's wedding just a month before. She sat across the conference table from me, and for the first time in 5 years, I saw her look at me with something approaching respect. Or maybe fear. Emma, Patricia began, her voice measured. I've reviewed your offer with my advisors. I understand the business rationale, but I need to know, is this personal? This is about business, I said firmly. Your company has assets that complement mine. The acquisition makes strategic sense. But yes, there's personal satisfaction in the fact that you spent 5 years dismissing me and now you need me to save what you built. I won't pretend that doesn't factor into how I feel about it. Patricia flinched slightly. I was wrong about you. Clearly. Completely. I underestimated you based on superficial factors. Your background, your circumstances. I judged you poorly, and I apologize. I appreciate that, I said. But apologies don't change the business fundamentals. Your company needs this acquisition. My company benefits from it. The question is whether you can accept the terms, including the reality that I'll be in charge. Patricia signed the acquisition agreement that day. The legal process would take weeks to complete, but the decision was made. I watched her sign the documents, her hand shaking slightly, and I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Satisfaction, certainly. Vindication. But also a strange kind of sadness for what could have been different if she had chosen respect over condescension 5 years ago. Victoria called me 3 days after the acquisition was finalized. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. What, Victoria? I said, not bothering with pleasantries. I need to talk to you, she said, and her voice sounded different. Smaller somehow. Can we meet? Why? Because I owe you a real apology, she said. Not a text, not a forced sorry at my mother's insistence. an actual apology where I take responsibility for how I've treated you. Victoria arrived exactly on time at the coffee shop I suggested. She looked different than she had at her wedding, less polished, less confident. "Thank you for meeting me," she began. "What I said at my wedding was cruel and unforgivable. Calling you an ugly pig in front of all those people, it was one of the worst things I've ever done. And it wasn't the alcohol talking. It was me showing who I really am when I'm not worried about consequences. I've been in therapy since the wedding," she continued, "trying to understand why I've been so terrible to you. The truth is, I was deeply insecure. I've never accomplished anything on my own. Everything I have came from my parents or from marrying Charles. I hated that you never seemed to need anyone's approval." "That's honest," I said carefully. "It doesn't excuse what you did, but it's honest." "I know," Victoria said. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. You were never the problem. I was." The months that followed brought continued transformation. The acquisition was completed successfully. Patricia fulfilled her consultant role with surprising professionalism, though our interactions remained cordial rather than warm. Mark and I went to couples therapy to work through the damage. He started defending me consistently, even when it created conflict with his family. Victoria and Charles divorced after 8 months. She moved back with her parents and started taking business courses. We were polite when we crossed paths, but the warmth would never be there. 6 months after the acquisition, we hosted a company celebration. I stood at the podium giving a speech about our journey, thanking the team. Looking out at the crowd, I saw Mark in the front row looking proud. Sarah and my leadership team smiling, David Chen and the other investors, and in the back, Patricia sitting with Thomas, watching with an expression I couldn't quite read. Several months ago, I was invited to speak at a charity gala, the same event where I had first felt so inadequate 7 years earlier. This time, my company was the platinum sponsor. My photo was on the event materials. I was the keynote speaker. I saw Patricia and Victoria in the crowd during cocktail hour, standing together quietly, watching as I was surrounded by admirers. Our eyes met across the room, and something unspoken passed between us. During my keynote speech, I talked about resilience and innovation and believing in yourself even when others doubt you. I never mentioned the Morrison family by name, but everyone in that room knew the subtext. The standing ovation felt like vindication. After the speech, Patricia approached me. "That was a powerful speech," she said. "You were right," Patricia continued, "about all of it. I was wrong, Victoria was cruel, and you didn't deserve any of it. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what was right in front of me." "Do we deserve the chance to have a better relationship with you?" Patricia asked quietly. "Time will tell," I replied. "I'm not holding grudges, but trust has to be rebuilt slowly." "That's on you and Victoria to do." "And Emma," Patricia said, "thank you. For the acquisition, for saving the company, for being gracious when you could have been vindictive." "You're welcome," I said. I walked away and found Mark waiting for me. "My mom actually apologized," he said. "It's progress," I acknowledged. "Small progress, but progress." 3 years have passed since Victoria's wedding. My company is preparing for an IPO that could value it at over $1 billion. I've been named to industry leadership boards. I've given keynote speeches at major conferences. But more than any dollar amount, I've built a life where I'm no longer invisible, no longer diminished, no longer willing to accept less than I deserve. Mark and I are stronger than ever. Patricia and I have a cordial relationship, always boundaried. Victoria is still working on herself. We're civil, but we'll never be close. And that's okay. So if you've stayed with me until the end of this story, thank you. Thank you for listening to my journey from invisible daughter-in-law to CEO. From ugly pig to industry leader, from someone desperately seeking approval to someone who no longer needs it. If any part of this resonated with you, please leave a comment sharing your experience. Tell me about a time you were underestimated and how you proved them wrong. Tell me about setting boundaries with difficult family members. Tell me where you're watching from and what brought you to this video. Hit that subscribe button to join this community of people who refuse to stay small, who believe in their own worth, who understand that success isn't about revenge, it's about liberation. Give this video a thumbs up if you believe the best response to cruelty is not more cruelty, but living well and succeeding on your own terms. The people who dismiss you today will be watching your success tomorrow. And when that moment comes, you'll find that their validation no longer matters because you'll have already validated yourself. You are not defined by people who refuse to see your value. You are defined by the life you build, the boundaries you set, and the respect you demand. Their judgment is temporary. Your worth is permanent. Now go build something that makes you proud, something that's entirely yours, something that reflects who you truly are beneath all the doubt and dismissal. And when people finally see what you've been all along, you'll be too busy succeeding to care whether they're watching. That's the sweetest revenge of all, not needing it anymore. Thank you for staying until the end. Remember, success is the best revenge, but peace is the best reward. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Don't wait for permission to shine. And never, ever let someone else's inability to see your worth define how you see yourself. You are enough. You have always been enough. Now go prove it to yourself, because that's the only person who truly needs to know.